Started, I'd like to introduce Kathy Steele, principal and owner of Red Caffeine, as well as Doug Farren from the National Center for the Middle Market. So welcome, Kathy, welcome, Doug, and let's take things away.
Thanks, Lisa. Doug, really excited to have you on. We've been following your work for quite some time at Red Caffeine. And so just could you give us a little bit, first let's tell us a little bit about you and, your career, and then talk a little bit about what the work that you do at the National Center for the Middle Market looks like.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kathy. And thanks again for having me as a guest. Excited to be here. Coming from snowy Columbus, Ohio. As you can tell by my background, I'm not actually in our football stadium, but it is blustery and cold here as well. Yeah, just a little about myself. So I'm a native Ohioan, grew up just north of Akron, Ohio, Northeast Ohio. I went to undergrad at Penn State University. I studied business administration there. I also played football for 2 years before I had a serious knee injury that forced me to hang up my cleats. But I coached my last 2 years as a student assistant, which was a great experience. After graduation, I moved back home, and fortunately, family friend of mine had his own small consulting business doing Six Sigma quality implementations. And at the time, Six Sigma was something that originally came out of Motorola in the early 90s. And a lot of the originators of that methodology had branched out and kind of started their own, small consultancies. So him and 4 other partners, principals of this business, were building their consulting practice, and they had just brought aboard General Electric as their biggest client. So they were doing a lot of the black belt and master black belt training. And there's about 15 people in the company. They needed somebody to kind of help with running the back end of the business. So, banking, legal, marketing, communications, setting up a website, all those types of things. So very early in my career, I got to, basically get my hands into all the facets of a very small business, which was great. And then eventually I was able to go through the training with one of our clients just outside of Chicago, actually, Navistar, and received my black belt as well, which was amazing. We merged with another company called Qualtech out of Scottsdale, Arizona. I spent a year commuting back and forth between my home and Scottsdale, and then decided I wanted to go back to school. So went to Fisher College of Business at Ohio State for my MBA, where I studied operations and logistics. And then after graduation, I went to work for a retailer here in Columbus called, at the time it was called Limited Brands, now called L Brands, which would mostly be known for Victoria's Secret and Bath and Body Works, its 2 larger brands. So spent some time in logistics operations, distribution center management. My last role was actually in inventory planning, doing some work for international. So I helped the Bath and Body Works brand open up stores in the Middle East, Turkey, and the United Kingdom. And during that work, I got a call from the head of career management at Fisher, who I'd kept in touch with since my student years, who said that they had just signed an agreement, coincidentally with GE, to launch a new center at the college that would study mid-sized companies. And I had to be honest, I had never heard of the middle market. I didn't know what that was. Again, having started my career at a very small company and then having worked at a Fortune 500 company. So initially turned that down. They were persistent and kept calling. And eventually I made it down to campus for an informational interview with our dean at the time. And once I was told kind of what this was going to be, I was really intrigued and thought this might be, kind of a once in a career opportunity, and took the leap and have not looked back. Coming up on 10 years since we launched in 2011. So it's been a great journey and have really enjoyed learning about these companies. Have had a lot of fun just, talking with a lot of CEOs and, getting involved in research and working with a lot of great organizations around the country like yourselves who support mid-sized companies. So it's been great.
That's incredible. I love the depth of your career and the different experiences. So I want to ask a follow-on question about the middle market, because I do feel like there's a lot of, there's not a lot of clarity around what the middle market is. So, and it's described differently by different entities. So tell us a little bit about the impact,
Yep.
or what makes up the middle market.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was really one of the issues we were trying to solve, right? Because to your point, there's so many definitions out there. There's different revenue ranges. You've got some organizations who look at head count. So it's wildly inconsistent. And, I give a lot of credit to GE Capital, is actually the division that we worked with to launch the center. As we were coming out of the financial crisis, 2008, 2009, they really wanted to understand who are these mid-sized companies. It was a lot of their customer base. What they found, though, was that there was very little information that was publicly available. It's not like you can Google, tell me everything there is about the middle market. There's not really financial statements available. A lot of these businesses are B2B, so they kind of fly under the radar of the, regular American consumer. So there was a lot of discussion and debate. I kind of joined the center right before we had our ribbon cutting. So some of the initial kind of scoping work had been done in collaboration with some of our faculty member and the faculty folks and the GE Capital team. And eventually we landed on this revenue-based definition of 10 million to $1 billion for a couple of reasons. One, it's fairly easy to remember and understand. Two, that is essentially the middle third of the US economy. We kind of took it and said, if we were to just cut it into thirds, where would be that floor and ceiling? And those were kind of the closest boundaries. From a small business standpoint, it makes a lot of sense as well, because the Small Business Administration, depending on industry, that advocacy tends to stop somewhere between the $7, $8, $9 million revenue range. So we kind of felt like, okay, once you've graduated out of that SBA kind of advocacy, then you've entered the middle market. And then at the top end, $1 billion company, for all intents and purposes, is going to have, layers of management and could be multinational and so forth. So we just felt like that made a lot of sense. It does present some challenges because we know that a $30, $40 million company is going to tend to act and behave like a small business, particularly when you try to compare it against a $700 or $800 million company. The fact that we both call them middle market has meant that in a lot of our research work, we've had to create subsegments. So we have typically what's in the 10 to 50 million range we call lower middle market. 50 to 100 million is core middle market, and then 100 million and above is the upper middle market. And they all have their kind of their own general, characteristics and distinguishing factors. But a bulk of the 200,000 or so companies that fall between that 10 million to $1 billion range actually reside in that 10 to 50. So again, it's a third of private sector GDP and employment in the US. We felt like it was an area that had been understudied and ignored and underserved. And, hence that's become the mission of the center, is to create ongoing thought leadership, networks, resources, programs that can continue to help the growth of these companies.
Yeah, I mean, I think we share that same kind of thinking and that opportunity in the mid-market. And I also, was really floored when I really learned about how much this segment of the drives our economy and how many people employ. And it's really astounding. So I love that there's focus there. We see the opportunity as well. And we talked a little bit about in the marketing of this event, recovery and would this be the sector that drives us again? And before we get into the report, this is the sector that drove the economy through recovery in the last recession. So, can you just speak to that impact a little as well?
Yeah, it's been one of the interesting things that we've continued to track since we launched in 2011. I mean, obviously, to your point, the data suggested that over the course of the last financial crisis, again, the period 2007 to 2009, if we just look at employment, for example, big businesses were shedding over 3 million jobs. The middle market actually added over 2 million jobs. So you think about the hit could have been much, much worse if not for, middle market companies who generally we've come to understand, they take longer views. They're not under the pressure necessarily of being a publicly listed company because almost 90% of them are privately held, whether they're family-owned businesses or they might have, private equity investments or they might be partnerships. But a lot of them are private, and they do that for a reason. Is because they can take, kind of a longer term view of their growth, of their investments, of their strategy. And, we talked to a lot of businesses right when we started, actually, who said, yeah, this was a great opportunity to us to add a lot of great talent, people who had gotten let go from bigger companies, and, they could add to our capability. So the other thing we've learned, these companies have been in business on average. Again, this is across, tons of different industries and size companies and geographies in the US. Over 32 years is about the average, length of time. So obviously you've got some younger businesses, you've got some, gosh, I know we've even come across some 100-year-old middle market businesses, but the jobs that they create, they're highly sustainable jobs. And as you'll see here in a moment with some of the data that I share, their revenue growth has been very consistent, and a lot of times it outpaces large and small. So, yeah, the middle market indicator, which I'm going to share today, it's kind of our bread and butter, and it's a way for us to track kind of how these companies are performing, and I'm happy to go into that in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, let's dive in. Give us a little bit of a storyline around how you do the research, how frequently it's released, that as we start to get into it.
Yeah. It's so some of our activities at the center, and you kind of think of what we do in kind of three big buckets, I guess. One would be research. The second would be outreach and engagement. So we have a lot of partnerships around the country. I was just telling somebody earlier this week on a call that, pre-pandemic, I was probably on the road 40 to 50 days a year, giving presentations in different parts of the country and literally coast to coast. That's why we felt it was important to call it the National Center for the Middle Market. I think a lot of people in our early year or two thought that we just focused on Ohio or just focused on the Midwest. But so research, outreach, and engagement. And the third bucket is education. I didn't mention in my background that we've also launched a class at Ohio State for our undergraduates on the middle market. We believe it's the only one of its kind in the US, where they get to hear from CEOs, C-suite executive speakers who come in and talk about their businesses. And then they work on team projects in groups with actual middle market companies. So that's been a lot of fun to teach, a lot of fun to advise the students, and it's opened a lot of their eyes as well. So if we go back to the research component, the middle market indicator was established really to give us that ability to monitor the performance of the middle market. It'd be one thing to do an annual survey or just check in every couple of years, but we felt like we really wanted to authoritatively talk about, different issues, measuring things that impact these companies, and then occasionally throwing in kind of new topics that are relevant or, newsworthy. So we launched this in the first quarter of 2012. For the first 9 years, it was a quarterly survey. This past year, we actually kind of backed off of that because over time, we noticed that the numbers really didn't change too drastically over the course of 3 months, and that actually checking in at 6-month intervals might be a little bit more effective. So now it's a semi-annual survey. But we work with a third-party company, a group called RTI Research out of Stamford, Connecticut. They help us basically design the survey. They help with the management aspects of that. But as you mentioned earlier, we go out to 1,000 C-suite financial decision makers at mid-sized companies. We weight those results against the US Census. So the reason we do that is we want to make sure that every time we do this survey, that the results and the data accurately reflect the makeup of the middle market. So in other words, we weight on 3 criteria, and those are industry makeup, size, and geography. And then, we kind of, like I said, publish kind of the ongoing data, which is revenue growth, employment growth, confidence in the economy, key challenges to growth, and then investment planning. And then we've got some additional topics as well. So I think we're going to dive into some of these in a little bit more detail. And if you want, I can just keep going and kind of start talking through some of these.
Let's starting with revenue.
So yeah, let's look at, so this data was collected in December. So the survey, the fourth quarter survey, as we call it, went out shortly after Thanksgiving. We collected, the 1,000 responses throughout the first almost 4 weeks. I think right around Christmas, we wrapped up the sampling. So you have to imagine, these companies, as we talk about some of the other topics, it'll be interesting because this was before the announcement that vaccines were approved by the FDA and started rolling out. So you'll see that maybe reflected in some of the confidence numbers. But it's basically, we ask questions where we look back over the prior 12 months, and then we also have some forecasts to look forward to 2021. So we'll talk a little bit about those. This first chart here are the results for 2020. You can see that for the year, revenue growth obviously took a big hit. I mean, I don't think there's any big surprise here, given everything that happened with the pandemic. Minus 1.2%. Prior to our summer survey in July, we had never seen, a negative growth rate. You can see by this trend line here, the red line are all of the, previous data points for revenue growth. And historically, it's averaged almost 6.5%. We also compare this to the S&P 500 because we want to say, what's that growth rate versus large companies? We don't really have that metric for small businesses, unfortunately. So we use S&P for large as a comparison. And as you can see, S&P took a bigger hit at minus 5.5% for the year. And consistently, since we've been measuring, the middle market growth rate has outpaced, large businesses. So that's kind of the story. We're going to be really curious to see what happens in our next survey, which will go out in June for the first half of 2021. But I'll talk a little bit about the forecast here in a second. So if you could click to the next slide. So yeah, this is the forecast. So again, we asked these executives, okay, tell us what your next 12 months looks like. You can see that the projection is actually pretty optimistic. We're happy to see this number. Traditionally, what we've seen are, these executives tend to be very conservative. So in almost every quarter or semi-annual survey, when we've asked the projection, the actual results have always beat the projection. That dip you see was from the summer. Again, not too optimistic. That was a little over, it looks like just under 2%, I think was the projection in the summer. Now it's up to 4.1. It's still a little bit below that historic average of about 4.5% or so. But we are glad to see that. So, I don't want to say that the tide has turned, but there's definitely some cautious optimism out there as we think about revenue.
Yeah, well, we tend to call it forecasting, and because it is, we don't like to go out on a limb and forecast way above what we think we're going to hit. So I agree, it is a little bit conservative. So you want to go on to?
Yeah, let's take a look at employment, because this is probably where we get the most questions. Everyone's always interested about the employment numbers. So if you go to the 2020 data, if you click the next, let's see, we should have, there we go. So yeah, kind of a similar story here, right? I mean, this is a lot of data. I mean, the big news here is that, again, no surprise, employment is down on average. Again, this is across 1,000 companies, 2.2%. I should mention, we look at this by sectors as well. So there's 9 different industries that we track. If there's particular interest, if somebody wants to, reach me after the talk today, I'd be happy to share some of that data. We also have it on our website. But there's big differences, right? Across retail, construction took bigger hits. And then you saw places like business services and healthcare actually, positive, both in the revenue growth and employment growth, surprisingly. But you can see the trend here, very similar story. Historically, the middle market, average revenue growth has been just about 4.5% over the course of time. Big hit in 2020, way down in the summer, starting to bounce back up. And again, the two trend lines we have below the middle market here, the blue and the darker gray, are small businesses and large businesses. And you can see both of them took much bigger hits for the year, 5.1% for small businesses and just over 8% negative or declines in employment. And for these proxies, we actually use ADP. They've got very nice kind of monthly employment reporting. So as a proxy, we use for small businesses, it's a headcount report. So we use 0 to 50 for small, and then 500 and above represent large. And we know that there's some issues with differences by industry, obviously, but that's the closest we can get to a comparison. So that's what we use. And then similarly for forecasts, if you go to the next part of the slide, we ask these managers again, what do you think your workforce is going to look like as we get through 2021? More good news here. They do expect growth, 2.3%, but you can see it's still kind of lagging below that, historically strong average revenue growth of about employment growth of about 4.5%. So still got a little bit ways to go, but again, hopefully we're seeing these companies continuing to add jobs throughout the year.
Was there any industries that really pulled the number down
Yeah, it's same. It's retail.
Okay.
And that retail bucket actually captures restaurants, hospitality, tourism, the ones that we all read about that are taking the brunt of this because there still is a delay in, getting consumers and customers back into a lot of these spaces. That is the sector that's pulling a lot of these numbers down. But that is offset, as I said earlier, by business services and healthcare, and there are a few others who are doing a little bit better. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yep. Sure.
All right. Next, economics.
Yeah. So confidence. This is we always joke about this one because we say that there's always going to be some link between, are you confident because you have strong revenue, or do your revenue, does the growth that your company or business see, does it drive your confidence? Probably a little bit of both. But again, we've been tracking confidence over the years on 3 different levels: globally, nationally, and then locally. And for all intents and purposes, locally would mean, your metro, your region. It's another thing we know about mid-sized companies is that a majority of them tend to do business in kind of their local, in their backyard, right? Their suppliers, their customers. Certainly there are exceptions with some, multinational and international companies, but that's why we see the confidence always has been strongest in the local. It's what they know. They know the people, they kind of know the market, whereas the national and global seem very far away. There's very little they can do to influence that. It's mainly what they read, online or in the papers about what's going on in the Eurozone or in Asia or things like that. So you can see the trend here follows very similarly from quarter to quarter. I would say that in July, we hit record lows. Even when we started in 2012, we hadn't seen confidence ever on any of the 3 dimensions as low as we saw at that record low point, as we're calling out. But the biggest thing here is that this pattern stays pretty consistent, where the confidence is always highest at the local.
Got it. And then lastly, the capital and investment.
Yeah. So we've got a really interesting question in the survey. We frame this in a way that says, okay, if you had an additional $1 of revenue, what would you do with that $1? So it's kind of a twist on just saying, tell us your investment plans. Over the years, actually in the last 3-4 years, we've seen, the investing has actually gone up quite a bit. I think it's averaged about 65 to 70% of the respondents have said, yeah, we're going to take that and reinvest it back in our business. These pie charts, you can kind of see how that's represented. So a year ago in the December 2019 survey, 30% of the companies had said, I'm going to hang on to that. I want to save it. Maybe I've got an investment down the line I'm thinking of, or I just want to hold on to it to be conservative. But the rest of that chart represents the areas where they were looking to invest. And it was largely in IT at the time, interestingly, as well as like plant and equipment, new facility, things like that. Fast forward a year, you can see that hold number is way up to, a little over 4 in 10 companies. A lot of that driven by uncertainty, right? We still don't know in some cases and in some industries, like, when is revenue going to bounce back? When are we going to be able to re-engage with our customers? But interestingly, the two kind of big investment areas still have held true. So IT, some of it out of necessity, right? In a work from home environment, getting a Zoom license, maybe beefing up your cybersecurity. But in other cases, maybe accelerating some of the digital transformation plans that these companies had. And we can talk about that a little bit more later. But this is interesting for us to track because it kind of gives clues to how these leaders are thinking about how to grow their business, and also when there's a lot of uncertainty or challenges, how they tend to hold and be a little bit more conservative.
I'm curious if PPP would have played a factor in this at all in terms of investment. So do you have any nuanced information or like?
Yeah, if you can go to the next slide, we can shed a little bit of insight on that. So this is a little bit different of a question. So, the one that I just showed was on that, like, what would you do with $1? This is actually more like expansion planning that we have built either into our strategic plan or into our budget. You can see kind of these trends as well. So that top line, introducing a new product and service, has been trending down since last year. Same with entering into new domestic markets. Again, risks involved in that, right? Like, you have to go out and hire new people. You may not understand your competition, where to find customers. What has gone slightly up though, taking on new debt, right? So in the form of PPP, or maybe just you've got a line of credit with your bank, or facilities to access that have just become necessary. And then the willingness to, there's been a slight bounce up in, again, adding on new facilities. But again, that's going to vary by industry, right? I mean, if you're in a services business, a lot of companies have figured out that, hey, maybe this work from home thing might not be a bad idea, and maybe we don't have to sign that new office lease or expand our physical presence when we can be just as effective and productive working from home. So yeah, it's been a little bit of a mixed bag, I think, when it comes to expansion. Certainly, there's been a lot of new opportunities and ideas that have evolved as we've talked with businesses over the last 10 months as to how they see their futures. And it's been really interesting, manufacturing companies who say, oh yeah, I was very easily able to switch my production line to start producing masks and shields and these types of things, versus other businesses who have kind of struggled because, again, they're customer facing, or they've kind of yet to figure out a good way to either protect their employees or their customers. And so there's been some challenges along the way as well.
Great, thank you. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that didn't actually make the survey, because there's a lot of hot button topics right now, beyond the pandemic. Obviously diversity, equity, and inclusion became a huge topic in 2020, and it's absolutely continuing on. Can you share any insights or any feedback on that area and where mid-market companies are focusing or hoping to level up on those initiatives?
Yeah, happy to do that. I mean, so as you said, this is an issue that's been around, for a long time. It's, I would say, something that, especially having come from the private sector, it was something that we talked about for years. It was always part of our, values and things like that. Even at the college and the university level, given the events of this summer, a lot of the social unrest, I mean, it's certainly taken on a much more, I think, prominent place in the discussion, where it's now, become very, very evident that you have to have some focus on this. There has to be, effort put into thinking about DE&I in your organization, what that looks like and who do you have overseeing it. So this is one of the areas where we said, you know what, if we're tracking all these other things and we consider ourselves kind of experts on understanding the middle market, let's take a chance, let's take this opportunity via the survey to understand what's going on with middle market companies and their own DE&I, either efforts and or challenges and barriers. What are some of the big hurdles that they face? A small business, if you're working with 5-10 people, this may just kind of naturally weave into your activities. Smaller team, maybe more connected. And then big businesses, we, as I said earlier, have been thinking about this in many ways for a long time. But what's going on in the middle market? So we had a number of questions included. We wanted to understand how they viewed it, its importance. Fortunately, what we saw, at least in the self-reflection and answers that they provided, something along the lines of 80% of the leaders felt it was extremely or very important to their business to think about DE&I. When we asked a question about who oversees DE&I, not surprisingly, about a third of the company said that it falls into their HR leader's lap. Now, that can become very interesting because in some of our prior research that we've done on the HR function, on talent management in the middle market, sometimes that's a very small group.
Right.
It's not uncommon, and you may have seen this with some of companies you work with, but for every 100 or so employees, there may be one HR person, and they tend to be a generalist who's managing a lot of the administrative things, making sure paychecks are accurate, those types of things. So the strategic part of actually thinking through how to manage not only DE&I, but a lot of other HR related things has tended to be a challenge that we've seen over a number of different issues. But in that kind of management, so a third HR, about another third, the CEO or owner, he or she takes responsibility for it. This is okay. We can see that, if they're owning the culture of the organization and the strategy, and it would make sense that they also look at DE&I. And then about another 20% said that it's actually shared among the leadership team, that it's done at a committee level, at an executive committee level. The most interesting thing, only 5% of the company said that they actually have a position that's a DE&I director, or actually carved out a role for somebody to look at this specifically. What's being implemented right now? So, a lot of companies telling us we give our employees access to all types of training, diversity, racial bias, some of the more common ones. It starts to fall off though after the first 2 or 3 choices, where it was getting into only 20 or 30% were thinking about things like unconscious bias, pay equity, things outside of like workshops and just training classes, but how they're weaving this into their culture, which led us to our kind of final area that we looked at was asking, like, what are some of the big challenges and barriers that companies are seeing? And the big 2 that stood out above the rest were, one, having the internal capability to actually manage, which then goes back again to that oversight HR team. Do you have the right people on your team to actually effectively oversee your DE&I efforts? And then 2 was the financial resources to actually, implement different types of programs, whether it be, training, having consultants come in, having your own people kind of become train the trainer. Those were by far the 2 biggest hurdles. The third, which was again a distant third, was just like organizational inertia around it. And that could just be because it's kind of ingrained and people felt like we're doing such a good job at it. We don't really have a need to put a lot more resources into it. But as I said earlier, I think this is something that's going to continue to rise in the minds of middle market leaders over time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, what we saw, whether it's regardless of where you sat in the market, is that there was this immediate response to either get on the train or not say anything. And there was a lot of backlash about, both sides of the coin. There were businesses that, put dollars and donations behind, making more impact for diverse groups. And then they were called out because they weren't, living those values. It was like more of we're going to throw money at it attitude. I do feel like there's a wide spectrum probably between who's doing this really, really well and who isn't. In my experiences, even in the corporate Fortune 500, Fortune 100 space, it's still likely a pretty small team that is, spearheading these initiatives in these organizations. And as a business, there's a little fear, that if you come out and say that you have this very diverse and inclusive culture, and then like 3 employees say you really don't,
Right.
it's very difficult to manage, what is right and what's wrong in this situation. So to me, it's about trying to find some way to evaluate what you truly are doing well, and then where, like in a year's time, could you level up in a few key areas? And so I think that's probably what most, businesses, period, regardless of size, struggle with, is like, where am I at and where could I get to, and what tools do I have to get there? And then that, does sort of help build a bridge between, if you don't have somebody that owns it, maybe it can be, managed by your HR leadership team member.
Yeah.
That's
yeah,
always-
we have I'll share an example. We've got a really nice program at Fisher College of Business. It's been around since, I believe, 2016. It's actually a collaboration between JP Morgan Chase, who actually funds the program, and then we work with the Ohio Minority Supplier Development Council. And it's actually focused on mid-sized minority-owned and female-owned businesses in the state of Ohio. The topics tend to focus on supply chain and operations, but we bring in, 8 to 10 companies in these sessions. And, I think one of the challenges is it's not like you can sit through an academic class on DE&I. We felt like it's actually better to bring in, leadership teams, have them go through not only a little bit of classroom type experience, but then we pair them with kind of community groups. So food banks and, things in the community. And what it teaches them along the way is how to kind of make their own operations better, obviously, but then they work together as a diverse leadership team, and they kind of get that experience to go along with maybe some of the topics that they're learning in the classroom. So that's been a pretty successful program for us. We're looking to expand that maybe into some other areas that aren't just specifically supply chain, but I agree with your point. It's, it's not a one size fits all. Certainly. I think every organization kind of has to figure out, okay, what's going to be the best for my team and my culture, and, what's it going to take to get us to where we need to be? Not necessarily where we think we are, because those two aren't always the same when you talk to your workforce.
I mean, I think it's, even though the numbers don't look as drastic as they could be, and what we do also see is there's certain sectors that just don't have talent, accessible talent. So if we don't start thinking more about diversity in our hiring practices and our training practices and our, alliance practices, we're gonna really start to have a shortfall on actual humans to do the work that we need them to do. So that's the other side of it. It's not just about doing the right thing. It's like, you are not going to survive if you don't have access to a talent base. So there's, I think 2 sides of the story. And so I do feel like this is going to be a ongoing topic for business leaders in this sector, because it's just going to impact us in so many different ways.
Yeah. Which, by the way, I'll just add, we didn't have a slide about the challenges to mid-sized businesses, which right now in the last year, it's pretty much been the uncertainty related to COVID. It's also been, effectively thinking about getting back to the office in a safe way. We asked a question. We've actually done 3 surveys now around COVID impacts. And in this last survey, we wanted to know how many businesses were actually back to work. About 55% of middle market employees are fully back to their office or shop floor or whatever. The rest are either in, some phase of transition, or they're waiting for vaccination, or I think a very small percentage of maybe less than 5% have actually fully transitioned to virtual, where they'll never go back. But I was going to say, in the first couple of years of the MMI, the number one challenge for growth for companies was healthcare. So the Affordable Care Act had just been passed, and a lot of these companies were struggling with that. Then around 2014, 2015, they kind of said, what we saw in the data was, oh, okay, we've learned to live with this. We'll figure it out. But the next big challenge for 2014, 15, almost through the start of COVID was talent. And even, despite those strong employment growth numbers, what they were telling us was we could be growing even faster if we could find the right talent, to kind of help fuel that growth for our companies. So I think it's still continuing, as you said. I mean, it's going to be a big issue to find the right talent, but then making sure that there's enough focus on diverse talent as well, I think will be, an important issue going forward.
Absolutely. So last thing on the, what didn't make the report was around digital transformation. Obviously, there's the obvious, the fact that so many people all of a sudden had to work from home, and most organizations weren't set up for a remote workforce. What else are people investing in terms of their digital transformation? What do you think is going to be like, this was because of COVID, or this is going to have some long-term impact on our economy?
Yeah. So from the center perspective, this is something that we started looking at a couple years ago. One of our former sponsors was Cisco Systems. So from a technology perspective, they had a high amount of interest in, hardware, software, the cloud, cybersecurity. And so that got us thinking like, okay, we should be, again, keeping our eye on the state of digital transformation, the digital journey, so to speak. There's a couple different phrases for it. And then as you pointed out, I mean, the floor kind of dropped in March of last year. There was this huge shift to, everything virtual, no travel, and so forth. To your question about, what do we see as kind of temporary versus more permanent things? I think what a lot of, and you may have heard this, but, a lot of businesses are maybe coming to the realization that maybe we don't have to be on the road as much. Like, maybe we don't have to have the big trade show, and maybe we don't have to, go to all the live in-person events. Now, I hear some other people saying, gosh, I can't wait. As soon as it opens up, I'm going to be on the road, 5 days. There's like pent up, maybe eagerness and a little bit of frustration around that. So again, there's some variation by industry and by company as well. But what I've been seeing is in this void of being able to meet with your customers, that's been one of the big challenges too. I think certainly getting people back to work, getting your own team back to work has been something internally to grasp with. But then you think about like, I haven't been able to visit my customers. I haven't been able to go to those sales meetings or just drop by and see how things are going. Or, in some cases, we've got manufacturers who do kind of post-sale service work. They can't go in to see, to perform maintenance and service. And so there's this real fear that they've lost the customer engagement. And so what we're seeing are companies that are thinking about really creative ways to address that. There's an example of a company outside of Philadelphia. They make kind of gas cylinders that help with all different industries, but primarily the clean energy industry. International company, so they have customers all over the world. And, their vice president, it's a second generation family owned business. So the son of the founder, he said, yeah, I used to be on a plane like all the time, flying all over the world. I go make these presentations. I'd share all this information. We get the specs from the customer. Well, they haven't been able to do that in almost a year. So what they did was they hired a videographer. They bought a drone. They started creating these like small, well-produced videos and started hosting both open session and then private kind of one-on-one virtual meetings. And their business is up 40%. I mean, wow. Their 2020 results were 40% higher than pre-pandemic budget. And in 2021, they're looking to grow another 65%. So it's been like a huge shift. And what they learned was like, okay, yeah, I'll probably get back on a plane occasionally, but I can figure out how to leverage this technology in a way that's going to maybe replace some of that face-to-face engagement that I had before. And they said it's probably something that's going to remain with them as a permanent feature of their customer engagement, marketing, and sales strategy, which is pretty interesting. In other cases, you've seen, maybe companies were kind of on the fence about, well, we can hold off another 3 or 4 years in investing in, something that makes our plant more efficient or makes our operations more efficient, or, that Salesforce platform that we wanted to invest in so we could be closer to our customers. Like, we're still good with the Excel spreadsheet. Some of those decisions have actually been kind of pulled forward as some of these companies have kind of reevaluated what they think it's going to take for them to remain competitive. Certainly, if you think about all the examples in the retail industry, like e-commerce being the biggest one, but then moving to like touchless transactions with your customers, curbside pickup, I think that's going to be here to stay. I know personally, I don't know if we'll like really ever go back to full time, like in the grocery store shopping. We love the convenience of being able to pick out our groceries and to just go at a set time. And yeah, there's going to be some things that don't get into the bag because it had to be substituted. But I know personally, I'm willing to live with that inconvenience because it saves me time. I can do other things instead of spending an hour walking around with my cart. So there's lots of different examples of things that I think are going to be, permanently here. I think for middle market companies, the challenge for them has become, a lot of them have been successful because they know exactly what they do well and they've done it well for a number of years. And sometimes that, fear of change or uncertainty about whether they're making the right investments may slow them down from doing so. But again, I think it's going to take a lot of kind of looking out to what your peers are doing, thinking about some of these larger trends across the spectrum, and then, trying to make the smartest bets you can in terms of where to invest for digital.
Yeah. No, I mean, we've been obviously recommending digital transformation to clients for a long time. So it has been like very exciting to help them sort of further some of their digital sales strategies. And there's just so much technology available now. So it's really about getting your arms around how to put together that right technology stack that runs your business operations. Lisa, did we have any questions? I have got one final question, but I know there was a couple of things that came through on LinkedIn that I'm not seeing.
No, definitely. And I'm actually going to we had a question ahead of time, so I am going to bring it up a little bit higher. The question was extremely specific for what they were asking. But, Doug, we hadn't talked a lot about this today, but as far as companies trying to find equity partners, or when you're in that middle market piece, knowing capital is so important for growth, our question was really, to get specific, they had two particular technologies and they were looking to try to find equity funding partners to help them out, knowing that if they could just get a little more money, they could really go in and capture a certain percentage of some very lucrative markets. So was anything in the report that would maybe help relate them back to them, or any experiences that you've heard from all of the CEOs that you've probably spoken with and researched that might help point this person in the right direction?
So I appreciate the question. I think it's a great question. We do not specifically focus on that detailed of, guidance or advice. I will say this. One of the groups that we work most closely with is the private equity community.
Okay.
There is a specific community of PE firms and everyone in that ecosystem, which would include, the integration firms and the accountants and the lawyers and all that who work on deals. But the Association for Corporate Growth has been one of our strategic partners for the last almost 10 years. National organization based out of Chicago, but they have chapters in almost every city. A lot of these PE firms, belong to that group. All I've been hearing from them, and I just I'm actually doing a webinar tomorrow with the St. Louis chapter of ACG. There is so much capital on the sidelines just waiting to be invested that I'm sure, there'd be any number of firms. It's just kind of finding I think to the question is, how do you find the right partner? I think it's just doing some research, but maybe starting with some outreach, getting some referrals or, finding some other businesses that may have had success with similar types of products, and finding the right partner to invest in those and successfully taking them to that next level, which it sounds like that's what the interest is. But, in some cases too, I don't know what the banking relationship is with, but maybe the bank could help, or, direct to the right kind of resources to help with that. But I know there are literally some middle market businesses that are getting solicited, 2-3 times a week, unsolicited phone calls from PE firms who are asking if they're interested in going into relationships. So I know the interest is out there, but it might just take a little bit of digging to find the right partner.
No, I think those are great points. As you said, maybe not your area of expertise, but even hearing and knowing your connections, that there is money available. Don't put it wrong, and don't think just because of where we're at in these economic times that that's not an opportunity. It really,
Yep.
It is out there. Looks like Larry has a follow-on question. A lot of investment money looking for strong investors. Do you see any middle market owners looking to take advantage of higher multiples to sell sooner than planned? Has any of that come up in conversation, or again, maybe something more for one of the associations that you partner with?
Yeah, so we have a little bit of data on that. I mean, again, it was in the survey, particularly around, the last 10 months, we did ask, how has the pandemic affected maybe some future plans, and maybe a little bit less appetite for M&A right now, both on the buy and sell. But again, the other phenomenon, which we had been tracking pre-COVID, was actually the amount of family-owned business. Is about 40% of the middle market are family-owned businesses. And I wouldn't call it a bubble necessarily, but we're kind of seeing, this phenomenon that there might be some owners that are getting to that age where they want to step away and retire, boomers and so forth, who are like, hey, what's my exit plan going to be? And so it may be 1 or 2 years away, but maybe this has, accelerated that opportunity to the question, because now is the right time to do that. There's a lot of eager buyers out there. So I would say that if that opportunity presents itself, some previous work we had done on transition planning for middle market businesses would suggest that process in and of itself takes about 12 to 14 months to prepare, to get all your ducks in a row, financials, how you're going to succession plan, the integration, all the different things that you want to do for that transaction. It's not just, snapping the fingers and then signing some papers. It takes a little bit of work. So certainly if the opportunity presents itself, I would say start that now, and, could be a good chance to sell a little bit earlier than planned.
Great. Thank you so much, Doug. Well, Kathy, I'll let you ask your last question, and then we'll move to close to tell everyone about how they can get in touch with Doug and also what's next for our webinar series. So final question of the day.
Doug, is there one thing or one action you suggest a mid-sized firm consider this year?
Oh yeah, that's always the $1 million question. We talked a little bit earlier about digital transformation. I think that's going to be a really big opportunity, just in order to continue to fuel growth. Obviously been hearing the word pivot a lot, like, oh, I've pivoted my business to do from here to here. And certainly I think middle market companies by and large have the ability to do that. They're kind of at that sweet spot, where they do have enough experience and they've been around and they've got scale to be able to make some of those changes and adjustments to their businesses. But I would just say be open, to think about new opportunities. It's been a challenging time. It's been an, very unusual time, certainly, but that doesn't mean that it has slowed people down. We've had a number of conversations with companies who said, they've grown as fast as they've ever done. And a lot of it has just been the openness and the willingness of the leadership team or the owner or CEO to kind of try new things, experiment a little bit. And I think addressing the talent issue is also going to be of significance, as it always is. It's always been an issue for these firms. So placing some bets in digital and trying to think about how to make your company as efficient and productive as possible through some of these tools, I think would be a great place to start. And then, thinking about what are going to be some of the longer lasting trends that we see that permanently are here to stay rather than just something that's temporary because of the situation we're in.
Yeah, great. And just, I know we're going to be wrapping up, Lisa. I just want to make mention that Doug is always looking for great stories about mid-market companies. So as we bring up sort of ways to get in touch with him, keep that in mind. So, you know, they're always looking for people on their podcasts and to feature great business stories in some of their spotlights. So.
Oh, great point. And Doug, first off, thank you so much for being our guest today, sharing all of this great information. For those of you that attended live or maybe watching the recording, if you'd like to get in touch with Doug, as Kathy said too, they're always looking for great stories and individuals to meet with. We've got Doug's contact information up on the screen right now, or you can also reach out to him on LinkedIn. So again, Doug, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
As we look to what's next, we'll be looking at March 18th, so 4 weeks from today. We're actually changing things up a little bit. We are partnering with Women in Manufacturing for our next event. We'll be focusing in, as you can see, with a panel of 3 speakers, and our own Kathy Steele will also be on as a moderator, but really looking at how you empower your leaders and emerging leaders by helping them align their career goals with where your company goals are. So these 3 women have had some exceptional experience where they've really aligned where they personally like to go with the company's goals and become very integral members of their organizations, but also have gained so many skills and experiences to really help them transform who they like to be as they continue their career path. So again, this is March 18th, starting at noon Central Standard Time. You can go to redcaffeine.com where we'll have the link and you can go ahead and register. So again, in partnership with Women in Manufacturing, this is actually going to bring you to their website. We're running everything together. So when it brings you out, just know we are part of their roadshow as we head to March. For those of you attending for the first time on our Business as Unusual webinar series, we hope you enjoyed today's session. Again, feel free to get in touch with Doug if you have any questions, or if you're curious how Red Caffeine can help you with our stance as being growth consultants, feel free to reach out to us at connect@redcaffeine.com. Thanks again so much for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day.